Dr. Sarah Chen had always believed that being in the right place at the right time was just coincidence. She never imagined it would change her life forever. On that cold Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle, she was rushing to catch the bus when she heard the screech of tires and a sickening crash. A black sedan had jumped the curb and slammed into a lamppost. Steam rose from the crumpled hood as Sarah dropped her medical bag and ran toward the wreckage. Inside, she could see a man slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling from his forehead. "Sir, can you hear me?" she called out, trying to open the jammed driver's door. The man was unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. Sarah noticed his expensive suit and the military bearing evident even in his unconscious state. Something about his posture, even injured, suggested discipline and authority. Other bystanders gathered around, some calling 911, others just staring. Sarah managed to force open the door and immediately checked his pulse. It was weak and thready. She could see he was going into shock from internal injuries she couldn't yet identify. "I'm a doctor," she announced to the crowd. "Someone needs to direct the ambulance here when it arrives." She began her assessment, noting the way his breathing hitched and the pallor of his skin. This man was dying and the ambulance was still minutes away. Sarah made a quick decision that would haunt her later. She noticed the man's jacket had shifted, revealing what looked like a small device attached to his chest. It wasn't medical equipment she recognized, but it was clearly some kind of monitoring device. The display showed erratic readings that made no sense to her medical training. The device suddenly began beeping frantically. The man's vitals were crashing faster than she'd expected. Without hesitation, Sarah began emergency resuscitation procedures right there on the sidewalk. She positioned his airway, checked for spinal injuries, and started chest compressions when his heart stopped. For 10 crucial minutes, Sarah fought death itself. She ignored the growing crowd, the arriving sirens, and the strange looks people gave the mysterious device on the man's chest. All that mattered was the rhythm of compressions and rescue breaths that kept him alive. When the paramedics finally arrived, they were amazed to find the patient stable. Sarah had managed to restart his heart and maintain his breathing. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, the man's eyes fluttered open for just a moment. He looked directly at Sarah with an intensity that made her step back. "Thank you," he whispered, though his voice was so weak she almost missed it. Then his eyes closed again as the paramedics rushed him to the ambulance. Sarah watched the ambulance disappear into traffic, feeling oddly empty. She'd saved lives before in her work at the hospital, but something about this felt different. The man's brief moment of consciousness had carried weight, as if he was someone far more important than a random accident victim. She picked up her scattered belongings and finally caught a later bus to work. Throughout her shift at Seattle General Hospital, Sarah found herself thinking about the stranger. She checked with the emergency department, but they had no record of anyone matching his description being brought in. It was as if the man had vanished completely. Even more strange, when Sarah returned to the accident site that evening, there was no sign that a crash had ever occurred. The lamppost stood undamaged, the sidewalk was clean, and no one in the nearby shops remembered seeing any accident. Sarah began to wonder if she'd imagined the whole thing. But the soreness in her arms from performing CPR was real, and she could still picture the man's face with perfect clarity. Most puzzling of all, she couldn't stop thinking about that strange device and the way his eyes had seemed to recognize her in that brief moment of consciousness. That night, Sarah went to bed with an uneasy feeling that her simple act of helping someone in need had set something much larger in motion. She had no idea that her decision to save one man's life had just altered the course of events in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah didn't notice the black cars that had begun patrolling her neighborhood, or the fact that her apartment building was now under subtle but constant surveillance. The man she'd saved wasn't just anyone, and her heroic actions had brought her to the attention of people who operated in shadows she didn't even know existed. 3 days after the accident that might not have happened, Sarah's world began to unravel in ways she never could have predicted. It started with a simple headache during her morning rounds at the hospital. By lunch, the headache had intensified into something that felt like her. Skull was being squeezed in a vice. "You look terrible," her colleague, Dr. Martinez, observed as Sarah steadied herself against the nurse's station. "Maybe you should go home early today." Sarah shook her head, immediately regretting the movement as waves of nausea washed over her. "I'm fine. Just need some coffee and aspirin." But even as she said it, she knew something was seriously wrong. She'd never experienced anything like this before. The symptoms escalated rapidly throughout the afternoon. The headache became so severe that fluorescent lights felt like daggers piercing her brain. Her hands began trembling uncontrollably, making it impossible to write patient notes or perform even simple medical procedures. By evening, Sarah was struggling to maintain her composure. She'd excused herself from patient care and was sitting in the break room when Dr. Martinez found her again. This time he took one look at her pale, sweating face and insisted she let him examine her. "Your pupils are dilated and reactive, but there's something else," he murmured, checking her reflexes. "Sarah, when did you last eat? Your blood sugar might be crashing." But the blood tests came back normal. Everything came back normal. Temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, blood chemistry, brain scans. According to every medical test available, Sarah was perfectly healthy. Yet she felt like she was dying. The strange symptoms continued to worsen over the next 2 days. Sarah called in sick to work, something she'd never done in her 5 years at the hospital. She spent most of her time in her darkened apartment, unable to tolerate light or sound. On the third night, things took a turn for the worse. Sarah woke up in a cold sweat, her heart racing so fast she could hear it pounding in her ears. When she tried to get up for water, her legs gave out completely. She collapsed on her bedroom floor, unable to move. Panic set in as Sarah realized she couldn't feel her legs at all. The numbness was spreading upward through her body like ice water in her veins. She managed to reach her phone and dial 911, but when she tried to speak, only whispers came out. The paramedics who arrived found her conscious but barely responsive. They rushed her to Seattle General, where her colleagues took over her care with visible concern. Dr. Martinez ran every test he could think of, but the results were baffling. "It's like her nervous system is shutting down," he explained to the attending physician, "but there's no indication of what's causing it. No toxins, no infections, no autoimmune markers, nothing." Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness over the next day. During her lucid moments, she found herself thinking about the man from the accident. Something about her condition felt connected to that strange device she'd seen on his chest, though she couldn't explain why. On the second day in the hospital, Sarah's condition stabilized somewhat, but she remained weak and disoriented. The medical team was preparing to transfer her to a specialist facility when something unexpected happened. Dr. Martinez was checking her chart when he noticed a man in an expensive suit talking to the head nurse. The man looked familiar, though Martinez couldn't place where he'd seen him before. What struck him as odd was how the entire nursing staff seemed to defer to this stranger, as if he had some kind of authority in their hospital. "Who was that man asking about Dr. Chen?" Martinez asked the head nurse after the stranger left. The nurse looked confused. "What man? No one's been asking about her except family and other doctors." Martinez was certain he'd seen the conversation, but when he pressed further, none of the staff remembered seeing any stranger. It was as if the man had never been there at all. That evening, Sarah experienced another episode. This time, instead of the numbing weakness, she felt a strange surge of energy coursing through her body. It was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, as if electricity was flowing through her veins. During this episode, Sarah became aware that she could somehow sense things happening in other parts of the hospital. She knew that Mrs. Patterson in room 302 was having complications from her surgery, before the monitors even registered the problem. She could feel Dr. Rodriguez's stress as he struggled with a difficult diagnosis 3 floors away. The sensation was overwhelming and terrifying. Sarah tried to call for a nurse, but the strange energy surge had affected her ability to speak normally. Instead of words, what came out sounded almost like a different language entirely. When the episode ended, Sarah collapsed back onto her hospital bed, completely drained. She lay there in the darkness, trying to process what had just happened to her. Whatever was wrong with her wasn't getting better. If anything, it was evolving into something she didn't understand at all. As she drifted toward an uneasy sleep, Sarah had no way of knowing that her mysterious illness was actually the beginning of a transformation. The man she'd saved had carried something within him that was now becoming part of her, changing her in ways that would soon make her the center of attention for forces she'd never imagined existed. Sarah's final collapse came without warning on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after she had saved the mysterious stranger's life. She had been feeling slightly better and had convinced Dr. Martinez to let her try walking around the hospital floor. The strange episodes had seemed to subside, and her strength was slowly returning. She was making her way down the corridor, holding onto the wall for support, when everything changed in an instant. The fluorescent lights above her began to flicker in a strange pattern, as if responding to some invisible signal. Other patients and staff didn't seem to notice, but to Sarah, the lights felt like they were communicating with her. "Dr. Chen, are you all right?" asked Jennifer, one of the nurses she'd worked with for years. But Jennifer's voice sounded distant and distorted, as if it was coming from underwater. Sarah tried to respond, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, she felt that same surge of electrical energy she'd experienced before, but this time it was 100 times stronger. It started in her chest, right where she remembered seeing that device on the stranger, and spread outward through every nerve in her body. The sensation was overwhelming. Sarah could suddenly perceive things far beyond the normal range of human senses. She could feel the electromagnetic fields of every piece of medical equipment in the hospital. She was aware of radio waves passing through the building, of cellular signals, of satellite communications high above the earth. But it was too much for her human brain to process. The overload of information felt like her consciousness was being stretched beyond its breaking point. Sarah's vision began to blur, and she could hear a sound like rushing wind in her ears. "Get Dr. Martinez now," Jennifer shouted to another nurse as Sarah swayed on her feet. "She's going into some kind of seizure." But it wasn't a seizure. Sarah remained fully conscious even as her body began to shut down from the overwhelming sensory input. She could feel herself falling, but it seemed to happen in slow motion. As she collapsed to the hospital floor, Sarah's awareness expanded even further. In those final moments before unconsciousness took her, Sarah experienced something impossible. She could sense people and events far beyond the hospital walls. She was somehow connected to a vast network of consciousness that stretched across continents. Most disturbing of all, she realized she wasn't alone in this network. There were others like her, people who had been changed in similar ways, and they were all focused on her, drawn to her like iron filings to a magnet. Sarah hit the floor hard, her body convulsing as every muscle contracted simultaneously. The medical team rushed to her aid, but their equipment couldn't detect what was really happening to her. While her body lay unconscious on the cold hospital linoleum, Sarah's consciousness was elsewhere entirely. She found herself in a place that wasn't quite real and wasn't quite a dream. She was standing in what appeared to be a vast chamber made of crystalline walls that reflected images of people and places from around the world. In the center of the chamber stood the man she had saved. He looked completely different now. Gone was the expensive suit and the appearance of a normal businessman. Instead, he wore clothing that seemed to be made of the same crystalline material as the walls. His eyes held depths that spoke of knowledge far beyond human experience. "You saved my life," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the crystal chamber. "But in doing so, you've awakened something that has been dormant in you for your entire existence." Sarah tried to speak, but found she could communicate through thought alone in this place. "What's happening to me? What are you?" "I am what your people might call a guardian," the man replied. "My kind has watched over humanity for thousands of years, guiding and protecting from the shadows. The device you saw was keeping me anchored to your dimension, but it was damaged in the accident. When you saved my life, some of my essence transferred to you. You're becoming something new, Sarah. Something that bridges the gap between human and guardian." The revelation was overwhelming. Sarah felt the crystal chamber beginning to fade as her consciousness was pulled back toward her physical body. "I don't understand. Why me?" "Because you have the strength to handle what's coming," the guardian said as his image became translucent. "And because humanity is going to need someone like you very soon." Sarah's eyes snapped open back in the hospital room. She was surrounded by medical equipment and concerned faces, but she could barely focus on the physical world. The experience in the crystal chamber felt more real than anything around her. Dr. Martinez was checking her vital signs, relief evident on his face. "Sarah, thank God. You've been unconscious for 6 hours. We thought we'd lost you." But Sarah wasn't really back yet. Part of her consciousness remained connected to that vast network she'd sensed. She could feel others out there, guardians and humans who had been changed like her. They were all moving towards something, gathering for reasons she didn't yet understand. As the medical team continued their examinations, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to process everything that had happened. She was no longer entirely human, but she wasn't fully guardian either. She was something in between, something new. And according to the strange man she'd saved, that transformation was going to be necessary for challenges that lay ahead. Sarah had thought saving one person's life was the end of the story, but she was beginning to realize it was only the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous than she could have imagined. Sarah's eyes opened to a world that looked completely different than it had before her collapse. The hospital room appeared normal to anyone else who might be watching, but to her transformed senses, everything was alive with energy patterns and connections she had never noticed before. She could see the electromagnetic fields generated by each piece of medical equipment as shimmering auras of different colors. The IV drip beside her bed pulsed with a gentle blue light that matched the rhythm of her heartbeat. Even the walls seemed to contain networks of energy flowing through the building's electrical systems. Dr. Martinez was sitting in a chair beside her bed, reading through her chart with a worried expression. Sarah realized she could sense his emotional state without looking at his face. His concern felt like a warm orange glow surrounding him, mixed with threads of confusion and fear. "Dr. Martinez," Sarah said softly, testing her voice. It sounded normal to her ears, but she could feel vibrations in the air that went far beyond simple sound waves. He looked up immediately, relief flooding his features. "Sarah, how are you feeling?" "You've been unconscious for almost 12 hours this time." Sarah sat up slowly, surprised to find that her body felt stronger than it had in days. The weakness and numbness that had plagued her were completely gone, replaced by a sense of vitality that was almost overwhelming. "I feel different," she said honestly, "like I can perceive things I couldn't before." She paused, unsure how much to reveal. "Has anyone else been asking about me? Anyone unusual?" Dr. Martinez frowned. "Funny you should ask. There have been several people here who claim to be from various government agencies, but they never produced proper identification. Security had to escort a few of them out." Sarah nodded, not entirely surprised. She was beginning to understand that her transformation had attracted attention from forces she was only starting to comprehend. That evening, after Dr. Martinez had gone home and the hospital had settled into its quiet night routine, Sarah experienced her first clear communication through the network she'd sensed earlier. She was lying in her bed, focusing on the energy patterns around her, when suddenly her awareness expanded far beyond the hospital room. She found herself connected to dozens of other consciousness across the globe, all of them somehow linked to the same mysterious network. Most of the other minds felt human, but altered, like her. However, there were others that felt completely alien, ancient and powerful in ways that made her new abilities seem insignificant by comparison. One of these ancient minds reached out to her directly. The contact felt like standing in the presence of a mountain, something vast and enduring beyond human comprehension. "Young Bridgewalker," the voice spoke directly into her thoughts, "you have awakened at a crucial time. The barriers between dimensions are weakening, and those who would harm your world are preparing to take advantage." Sarah tried to respond, but found that communicating through this network required a different kind of focus than normal thought. She had to project her consciousness outward while maintaining her connection to her physical body. "What am I supposed to do?" she managed to send back. "I'm just a doctor. I don't understand any of this." "You understand more than you realize," the ancient mind replied. "Your healing knowledge combined with your new abilities makes you uniquely valuable. But first you must complete your transformation." Images began flowing through the connection, showing Sarah glimpses of events happening around the world. She saw other people like her, humans who had been changed through contact with guardians. Some were struggling with their transformations while others had learned to embrace their new abilities. But she also saw darker things, creatures that existed in the spaces between dimensions feeding on chaos and destruction. They were drawn to points where the barriers between worlds grew thin, and they were gathering in increasing numbers. "The one you saved," the ancient mind continued, "was returning from a mission to strengthen one of these barrier points. His injury should have killed him, but your intervention allowed him to survive and complete critical repairs. However, the energy transfer has accelerated a process that was meant to unfold gradually." Sarah saw flashes of the guardian she had saved, now fully healed and working with others of his kind, to reinforce dimensional barriers around the globe. But their efforts were barely keeping pace with the growing threat. "You must choose," the ancient mind told her. "Remain as you are and let your new abilities slowly develop over months or years, or complete the transformation now and join the active defense of your world." The choice seemed impossible. Sarah's entire life had been dedicated to helping people through medicine, but this was asking her to leave that world behind entirely and enter something she barely understood. What would completing the transformation mean? She asked. You would gain abilities that allow you to travel between dimensions, to see and interact with the Guardians directly, and to help maintain the barriers that protect your world. But you would also become something that is no longer entirely human. Sarah felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Through the network, she could sense the urgency of other Guardians and transformed humans as they worked to address growing threats around the globe. How long do I have to decide? The choice must be made within the next few hours, the ancient mind replied. The dimensional alignment that allows for safe transformation is ending. If you wait, the process may become dangerous or impossible. As the connection faded, Sarah found herself back in her hospital bed, overwhelmed by everything she had learned. She was no longer just a doctor who had helped an accident victim. She had become part of an ancient conflict between forces that existed beyond normal human awareness. The decision before her would determine not only her own future, but potentially the safety of everyone she cared about. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine what her life would become if she chose to complete this impossible transformation. Sarah spent the longest night of her life wrestling with the impossible choice before her. She walked the empty hospital corridors, using her new senses to perceive the building in ways she never had before. Every room contained people fighting their own battles against illness and injury, their life forces visible to her transformed vision as flickering flames of various colors and intensities. In the pediatric ward, she paused outside the room of a young girl who had been brought in earlier that day with severe injuries from a car accident. The child's life force was weak and unstable, barely holding on despite the best efforts of the medical team. Sarah found herself reaching out with her new abilities, somehow able to sense the exact nature of the internal damage that the doctors hadn't yet detected. She could feel a slow internal bleeding that would become critical within hours if not addressed immediately. Without thinking, Sarah entered the room and gently placed her hand on the sleeping child's forehead. Energy flowed through her in a way she didn't fully understand, and she watched as the girl's life force stabilized and strengthened. The bleeding stopped, and damaged tissues began to repair themselves at an accelerated rate. When Sarah removed her hand, she realized she had just done something that was medically impossible with current human knowledge. The girl would wake up completely healed, with doctors unable to explain her miraculous recovery. The experience crystallized something important for Sarah. Her medical training had always been about helping people, but her new abilities could help in ways that normal medicine never could. She was beginning to understand that completing the transformation wouldn't mean abandoning her calling as a healer, but expanding it beyond anything she had previously imagined. As dawn approached, Sarah made her way to the hospital roof. She needed space to think, away from the constant buzz of medical equipment and the emotional residue of human suffering that filled the building. Standing under the early morning sky, Sarah opened herself to the network once more. This time, instead of waiting for contact, she actively reached out to the guardian she had saved. The connection formed immediately, as if he had been waiting for her call. "You've made your decision," he said, though it wasn't really a question. She could feel his awareness of her thoughts and emotions through their link. "I want to complete the transformation," Sarah replied, "but I need to understand what it really means. Will I still be me?" "You will be more yourself than you've ever been," the guardian assured her. "The transformation doesn't replace who you are. It reveals who you were always meant to become." Images began flowing through the connection, showing Sarah glimpses of what her life could become. She saw herself working alongside guardians to prevent dimensional incursions that could devastate entire cities. She witnessed her healing abilities growing to encompass not just individual patients, but the ability to repair damage to the fabric of reality itself. But she also saw the costs. Relationships with normal humans would become difficult as she changed in ways they couldn't understand. Her work at the hospital would have to end, replaced by responsibilities that most people couldn't even conceive of. "The transformation will require you to leave your current life behind," the guardian explained. "But it will give you the power to protect that life and millions of others like it." Sarah thought about her colleagues, her patients, the simple satisfaction she had always found in helping people heal. Then she thought about the dark creatures she had glimpsed through the network, and the growing threats that only someone with her unique abilities could help address. "When does it happen?" she asked. "Now if you're ready." The dimensional alignment is at its peak for the next few minutes. After that, the opportunity will be lost. Sarah took a deep breath and looked out over the city where she had spent her entire adult life. Seattle spread out below her in the early morning light. Millions of people going about their daily routines with no idea of the hidden conflicts that raged around them. "I'm ready," she said. The transformation began immediately. Energy surged through Sarah's body, but this time it wasn't overwhelming or painful. Instead, it felt like coming home to a part of herself she had never known existed. Her vision expanded to encompass not just the electromagnetic spectrum, but dimensions of reality that had no names in human language. She could see the guardian standing beside her on the rooftop, his true form revealed as a being of crystalline light that existed partially in several dimensions simultaneously. Sarah looked down at her own hands and gasped. Her skin was becoming translucent, showing networks of energy flowing beneath the surface. But instead of being frightening, it felt natural and right. "The change is permanent," the guardian told her. "You can still appear human when necessary, but you will never again be limited by purely human perceptions and abilities." As the transformation completed, Sarah felt the full scope of the network opening to her. She was connected to hundreds of guardians and transformed humans across the globe, all working together to maintain the balance between dimensions. But she also sensed something else. Dark forces that had been gathering strength were becoming aware of her transformation. Her decision to complete the change had marked her as a significant threat to their plans. "They know about me now," Sarah said, understanding instinctively what the growing sense of malevolent attention meant. "Yes," the guardian replied, "which is why you need to come with me immediately. There are others you must meet and training you must complete before you can effectively use your new abilities." Sarah looked back at the hospital one last time. She had saved one man's life a week ago, and that simple act of compassion had led her to become something she could never have imagined. Now she was about to leave everything she had known to enter a world of ancient conflicts and hidden powers. But as she felt the needs and struggles of the Guardian network flowing through her consciousness, Sarah knew she had made the right choice. Whatever came next, she would face it with abilities that could make a real difference in protecting the world she loved. Sarah's eyes opened to a reality that defied every assumption she had ever held about the world. She was no longer on the hospital rooftop in Seattle. Instead, she found herself lying on what appeared to be a platform made of the same crystalline material she had seen in her earlier visions. The space around her was vast beyond comprehension, with no visible walls or ceiling. Geometric patterns of light moved through the air like living constellations, and she could sense that this place existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But what made her breath catch in her throat was the sight that greeted her as she sat up, arranged in perfect formation. Around her platform were 500 warriors, standing at rigid attention. They weren't human, though they had humanoid shapes. Each one appeared to be crafted from different materials, some crystalline like the guardian she knew, others seeming to be made of living metal, energy, or substances she couldn't even identify. Yet despite their alien appearances, Sarah could sense the unmistakable discipline and respect radiating from every one of them. They stood in precise rows extending far into the distance, their weapons held at formal salute positions. "Welcome, Bridgewalker," spoke a voice that seemed to come from all 500 warriors simultaneously. The sound harmonized in ways that human vocal cords could never achieve, creating music as much as words. Sarah struggled to her feet, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was seeing. "What is this place? Who are all of you?" The guardian she had saved stepped forward from the front rank of warriors. His appearance had changed again, now showing the battle scars and worn equipment of someone who had fought in conflicts beyond human imagination. "This is the Nexus," he explained, "the central gathering point for guardians from across multiple dimensions, and these warriors have assembled to honor you. Honor me." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't understand. I just saved someone's life." A figure stepped forward from the warrior ranks, this one appearing to be made of flowing liquid metal that constantly shifted and reformed. When it spoke, its voice had the weight of eons behind it. "You did far more than save a life," the metal guardian said. "Your actions prevented a cascade failure that would have collapsed dimensional barriers across 3 sectors of reality." Billions of lives in multiple universes were preserved because of your quick thinking and courage. More voices joined in from the assembled warriors, each speaking in languages that Sarah somehow understood despite never having heard them before. The dark forces had sabotaged the barrier maintenance mission. Our brother would have died and the barriers would have failed within hours. Your healing energy didn't just save his physical form. It repaired damage to his dimensional anchor that our most advanced technology couldn't fix. The Bridgewalker's transformation was prophesied in the old texts, but we had stopped believing it would come to pass. Sarah looked around at the assembled warriors with growing amazement. Each one represented civilizations and conflicts that spanned cosmic distances and time periods, beyond human comprehension. Yet they had all gathered here to acknowledge her transformation. A new figure approached, this one appearing as a being of pure light that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, Sarah felt the words resonate through every particle of her transformed being. You stand at the crossroads of destiny, Bridgewalker. Your unique nature, part human and part guardian, makes you capable of things that neither species can achieve alone. Images began flowing through Sarah's consciousness, showing her the scope of the threats facing not just Earth, but hundreds of inhabited worlds across multiple dimensions. The dark creatures she had glimpsed before were part of a vast invasion force that fed on the breakdown of reality itself. The enemy has been working for millennia to weaken the barriers between dimensions. The light being continued. They corrupt and destroy everything they touch, turning thriving worlds into feeding grounds for chaos. But why me? Sarah asked. Surely there are others more qualified to face something like this. The guardian she had saved stepped closer, and she could feel his warmth and respect through their connection. Because you made the choice to help without knowing what it would cost you, he said. That kind of courage is rarer than any power or ability. And because your human nature allows you to understand things that pure guardians cannot. The assembled warriors began to move, their formations shifting to create a central pathway. At the far end of the pathway, Sarah could see a structure that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal, pulsing with energy that made her new senses sing. That is the heart of the Nexus, explained the metal guardian. It contains the accumulated knowledge and power of every guardian who has ever fallen in defense of the multiverse. With your unique abilities, you can access that knowledge directly and become the weapon we need to turn the tide of this war. Sarah understood that she was being offered power beyond anything she had ever imagined, but she also understood the responsibility that would come with it. The simple life she had known as a doctor in Seattle was gone forever, replaced by obligations that spanned multiple realities. As she began walking toward the crystal structure, the 500 warriors fell into step behind her, their footsteps creating a rhythm that seemed to resonate through the fabric of space itself. With each step, Sarah felt her transformation deepening. Her human memories and experiences remained, but they were being augmented by knowledge and abilities that had never belonged to any single individual before. By the time she reached the heart of the Nexus, Sarah Chen was no longer just a doctor who had saved a stranger's life. She had become something new, a bridge between species and dimensions, with the power to protect reality itself from forces that sought to destroy it. As the crystal's energy enveloped her, Sarah felt the final pieces of her transformation clicking into place. The 500 warriors stood at attention behind her, ready to follow her into battles that would determine the fate of countless worlds. Her journey from a simple act of compassion to cosmic responsibility was complete. But Sarah understood that the real adventure was just beginning.